The sun sat high and merciless over the frontier yard, bleaching the dirt pale and baking sweat into every collar and hat brim. Dust hung in the air, stirred by boots scraping forward as men crowded the ranch gate, voices overlapping, tempers flaring. Each one had a story ready, a boast sharpened like a knife. Best shot in 3 counties. Worked cattle since he could walk. Would break any horse alive. The foreman barely looked up anymore. He'd heard it all. Coins clinked in pockets. Hunger showed in eyes. This wasn't pride talking, it was survival. At the far end of the line, half hidden by taller men, stood a woman. She didn't push, didn't plead. Her dress was plain, sun-faded, sleeves patched twice over. She held a small cloth bundle to her chest like it was all she owned, because it was. While the men barked their worth into the heat, she waited, silent, still. When her turn finally came, a snort of laughter rippled through the yard. "What's she here for?" someone muttered. "Lost her way to the laundry." The rancher stood by the gate then, a tall man with dust on his boots and years carved into his face. He'd been watching the line with tired eyes, measuring men the way one measures storms. When the woman stepped forward, the noise died down, curiosity sharp as a blade. She lifted her gaze. Didn't flinch. Didn't smile. "I don't talk much, mister," she said quietly. Her voice barely carried past the gate. "But I can cook." For half a breath, there was silence. Then laughter. Loud. Cruel. A man slapped his knee. Another shook his head. Someone called out, "This ain't a boarding house." The foreman waved her off without looking. Next. But the rancher didn't move. He studied her the way he studied a wounded horse, slow, careful, reading what wasn't being shown. He saw the way her hands didn't shake, the way her eyes never dropped. He saw scars at the wrist she didn't bother hiding. And something else. Not fear. Control. The laughter rolled on, but the rancher raised a hand. It fell quiet. "You cook for a living?" he asked. She nodded once. "Cooked for worse places than this." That was all. The rancher glanced back at the men still arguing behind her. Strong backs. Loud mouths. Desperation spilling out in every word. Then he looked at the woman again. "You're hired," he said. The yard froze. The foreman stared. "Boss." "She's hired," the rancher repeated, voice firm as iron. "Kitchen's that way." The woman didn't thank him, didn't smile. She just turned, adjusted the bundle in her arms, and walked through the gate, leaving behind a yard full of laughter that had suddenly gone very quiet, because something had just shifted, and nobody yet knew why. She arrived at the ranch near dusk, when the light thinned and the land turned the color of old brass. A single mule carried her bundle, cloth tied tight, corners worn soft by miles. She didn't look around much, just stood at the gate, hands folded, eyes lowered, as if she knew better than to claim space that hadn't yet been given. Wind slid through the grass and rattled the fence wire. Somewhere a hammer rang. The ranch breathed on, indifferent. The hands noticed her all the same. Work slowed. Glances lingered too long. Silence like hers made men uneasy. It asked questions they didn't want to answer. One spat dust. Another chuckled, low and mean. A third stared at her boots, counting scuffs like they told a story he didn't want to hear. She felt it, the weight of judgment, but didn't lift her chin. She had learned that stillness could be armor. The rancher came out from the barn with the smell of hay and sweat on him, eyes steady, voice plain. He didn't smile. He didn't bark. He laid down rules the way a man lays planks, straight, measured, meant to hold weight. No man touches another's things. No man raises a hand in anger. Work earns respect. Respect keeps you here. He said it once. Then again, slower. The land listened. She was shown a small room off the kitchen, clean, bare. A window that caught the last of the light. A basin waited. A hook for her coat. Nothing fancy. Enough. When she set her bundle down, she did it carefully, like it mattered where it landed. Outside, the ranch hands drifted back to their tasks, voices low. Trust wasn't given here. It was tested, day by day, fence post by fence post. At supper, she served quietly. Plates slid. Cups filled. She kept her eyes on the table edge, on the steam rising from food that smelled like home even if no one said the word. The rancher watched, not her silence, but her steadiness. Tension hung like a wire pulled tight. No one cut it. Not yet. And in that waiting, something began. Not friendship. Not safety. Just the first thin thread of belonging. Strong enough to feel, fragile enough to break. The first meal she cooked at the ranch didn't announce itself. There was no flourish, no proud call from the doorway. Just the slow drift of scent. Salted beef simmered until it fell apart. Onions softened low and patient. Bread warmed just enough to breathe again. The men came in from the fields quiet, hats in hand, drawn not by hunger alone, but by something rarer. Care. They ate slow. No jokes. No complaints. Just the scrape of spoons and the sound of men remembering what it felt like to be tended to. She stayed near the stove, eyes down, hands busy. When someone murmured thanks, she nodded once. Nothing more. Yet with every meal, something shifted. Shoulders loosened. Tempers cooled. Men who'd snapped over cards and chores found themselves sitting longer at the table. The rancher noticed it most at night. How the bunkhouse stayed quieter. How sleep came easier. Food didn't just fill bellies out here. It stitched people back together. Pieces of her story surfaced the way embers do, brief, glowing, then gone. A flinch when a voice rose too sharp. A scar at her wrist she covered without thinking. She never spoke of where she came from, but the rancher saw it in how she moved. Always aware of exits, never turning her back fully. Waking before dawn like someone who learned rest was dangerous. Silence hadn't made her small. It had kept her alive. The men, one by one, offered their own truths without meaning to. A hand who drank too much because sleep brought memories he couldn't outrun. Another who checked the horizon too often, having survived an ambush that took everyone else. A third, young and angry, hiding fear behind bravado. Around the table, with her food between them, words came easier. Not confessions, just enough honesty to breathe. She listened, always listening. When arguments sparked, she'd set a plate down between them. When someone sat alone, she made sure their portion was warm. She remembered who liked more salt, who couldn't chew tough meat, who needed coffee strong enough to keep the past at bay. In a place built on noise, gunfire, cattle, wind, her quiet became a kind of anchor. The rancher caught glimpses of what chased her. Riders in the distance made her hand still. Hoofbeats at night drew her to the window. Once he saw her standing in the moonlight, sleeve pushed back, fingers tracing old marks like she was counting debts owed by the world. Whatever she'd escaped hadn't forgotten her. That much was clear. And yet she stayed, kept cooking, kept showing up before anyone asked. In a land where people were judged by how loud they spoke or how fast they drew, she offered something different. Proof that survival didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered. So let me ask you, out here, among these broken men and long shadows, would you have noticed what she carried behind her silence? Or would you, like so many others, have mistaken quiet for weakness? The trouble did not arrive loud. It never did. It came on a dry afternoon when the wind died suddenly, when even the cicadas went quiet, as if the land itself sensed what was riding toward the ranch. 3 men appeared on the horizon, dark hats, straight backs, horses that moved with the confidence of being owned by cruel hands. Dust trailed behind them like a warning that arrived too late. The rancher saw them first from the porch rail. He didn't move for a long moment, just watched. The woman was inside the cookhouse, stirring a pot, unaware that her past had finally found the road that led to this place. They didn't dismount right away. That was the first insult. One of them called out instead, voice carrying easy and mean across the yard. We're looking for something that wandered off. The man said, quiet thing. Don't say much. Answers to no one. The ranch hand shifted. Hands drifted closer to belts. The woman stepped into the doorway then, wiping her palms on her apron. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. Her face drained of color, eyes fixed on the men, like she recognized the shape of this danger all too well. The second rider laughed when he saw her. There she is, he said. Told you she wouldn't get far. She belongs to someone, and that someone wants her back. They mocked her silence, circling words like buzzards. Said she was property. Said she was useless without orders. Said the rancher had made a mistake hiring something that didn't know its place. That was when the rancher stepped off the porch. Slow, measured, calm as stone. She works here, he said. That's all you need to know. The lead writer sneered. You're harboring trouble, rancher. Folks like her bring debts. Blood. Fire. The rancher didn't raise his voice. Didn't reach for his gun. Then you best ride on, he said. Because I don't return people like livestock. Silence fell heavy as thunderclouds. The men stared, recalculating. The woman stood frozen, breath shallow, waiting for the moment she had learned always came next. But it didn't. The riders turned away, with threats hanging in the air like smoke. We'll be back, one said. And next time we won't ask. As they rode off, the rancher finally looked at her. Not with anger, not with regret, just resolve. That was the moment he understood the truth. Hiring her hadn't invited trouble. It had revealed it, and he had already chosen which side he stood on. The ranch did not sleep that night. Lanterns bobbed along fence lines like cautious stars, their glow catching on coils of rope, stacked rifles, and the hard angles of men preparing for trouble they could already feel in their bones. Saddles were cinched tight. Ammunition counted, then counted again. The wind moved low through the grass, carrying the faint promise of hooves that hadn't yet appeared, but would. She moved among them without asking permission. Quiet, purposeful. Where others barked orders, she placed things where they needed to be. Water near the corral, bandages near the bunkhouse door, coffee kept hot and ready. No one told her what to do. Somehow she already knew. A ranch hand reached for a rifle and found it cleaned and waiting. Another cursed the dark, then found a lantern lit beside him. She didn't look up. She didn't explain. She just kept moving. The rancher watched from the porch, had pulled low, eyes narrowed. He'd hired her to cook. That was the bargain. But here she was, steady as a post, turning chaos into order without a single word wasted. When he stepped down and asked where she wanted the riders posted, she met his gaze for the briefest moment and pointed. One finger, one direction, no hesitation. He nodded and trusted it. That trust surprised him. It surprised everyone. As the hours wore on, nerves began to fray. Jokes died in throats. A distant sound, maybe thunder, maybe hooves, made hands tighten on wood and steel. She passed behind a young ranch hand whose hands shook too much to hide it. She set a cup into his palms, warm and grounding. He breathed. His shaking eased. Calm, it turned out, could be taught without a lecture. Then came the warning. She froze mid-step, head tilted, listening to something no one else had heard yet. The rancher followed her eyes to the dark beyond the south fence. Riders, he said. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The bell was rung. Positions were taken. Time snapped tight. When the men were finally set, when the last gate was barred and the night pressed close, she returned to the kitchen. She laid out food not for comfort, but for strength. Salted meat, bread, enough to last through fear. As they ate, no one laughed, but no one argued either. They were a unit now. Not loud, not pretty, but ready. The rancher looked around at his people, at her, and understood something he hadn't before. She was never just a cook. She was the stillness before the storm, and storms respected stillness. Night came down hard on the ranch, sudden and heavy, as if the sky itself wanted to smother the land. The moon was thin, a pale blade caught in drifting cloud, and the wind carried a smell that wasn't there an hour earlier. Horses. Not the ranches. The dogs went silent first. Then the insects. That was when the rancher knew. Trouble never announced itself with noise. It arrived on quiet feet, believing itself unseen. Riders crested the low ridge to the east. Dark shapes against darker ground. More followed to the south. Lanterns flickered briefly, then vanished. They were surrounding the place, patient, practiced. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was a reckoning. The ranch hands moved into position without shouting. Rifles lifted, breath shallow. Somewhere behind the main house, the cook stood in the doorway of the kitchen, one hand braced against the frame, listening. She didn't ask what was happening. She already knew. The first shot split the night like lightning. Wood exploded from the corral fence. Another shot followed, then another. Gunfire rolling in waves as the siege began in earnest. Horses screamed. Men shouted orders that were swallowed by chaos. The rancher fired once, twice, steady and controlled, barking commands between shots. Hold the west. Don't let him flank. Fear pressed in from every direction, thick as smoke. She moved before anyone told her to. While bullets tore into walls and windows shattered, she slipped low along the side of the house, staying in shadow. Her movements were economical, precise. No wasted steps, no panic. A ranch hand went down near the barn, screaming, clutching his leg. Without hesitation, she dragged him behind a feed trough, tied off the bleeding with a strip torn from her own sleeve. Her hands didn't shake. They never did. The attackers tried to rush the north fence. That was their mistake. She had warned the rancher days earlier, quietly, over supper, about that blind angle, about how sound carried there differently at night. Now, when 3 men broke cover and charged, the trap was already set. A lantern flared. Shots rang out from hidden positions. 2 men fell. The third turned to run and didn't make it 5 steps. Who the hell is she? One of the ranch hands shouted over the gunfire, watching her reload a rifle she had no business knowing how to use so well. No one answered. The antagonists grew desperate. One of them shouted her name into the dark, a name she hadn't used in years. It froze her mid-step. The rancher heard it too. He looked toward her, questions burning behind his eyes, but there was no time. The man kept shouting, spitting words like accusations. He told the truth loudly, cruelly. How she'd escaped, what she'd done to survive, why they'd hunted her across counties like a debt that wouldn't stay buried. A bullet struck the post inches from her head. She didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped into the open. The firelight caught her face for the first time that night, calm, resolute, unafraid. She raised the rifle and fired once. Clean. Final. The shouting stopped. The truth hung in the air, raw and exposed, but it no longer owned her. She had chosen where to stand. The fight raged another 10 minutes, though it felt like an hour. When it ended, the remaining attackers fled into the dark, dragging their wounded, leaving silence behind like a bruise. Smoke drifted low over the yard. Men groaned. Wood creaked. Somewhere a horse whinnied, lost and shaking. Dawn came slowly, bleeding gray into black. The rancher stood in the yard as the first light touched the hills, surveying the damage, the bodies, the people still standing. His gaze found her near the kitchen steps, rifle resting against her shoulder, eyes on the horizon. He didn't ask about her past. Not then. He understood something more important had been proven. She had stayed. And in a place like the frontier, that mattered more than any story she might tell. So here's the question for you. Riding along with us through this night of fire and choice, when the truth comes out under gunfire, do you run from it? Or do you decide, once and for all, where you belong? The fighting ended not with cheers, but with silence. Smoke drifted low across the ranch yard, curling around shattered fence posts, and boot tracks pressed deep into the dirt. The attackers were gone, some fleeing into the dark, others left behind with weapons dropped and courage broken. The ranch still stood, scarred, shaken, but standing. And in the quiet that followed, the weight of what had almost been lost settled over everyone like dust after a storm. As dawn crept in, pale and cautious, the ranch hands gathered near the main house. Faces were bruised, sleeves torn, hands trembling from spent adrenaline. Their eyes kept finding her, not with suspicion now, but something closer to awe. She had moved through the chaos, without shouting, without panic. She had saved lives with steady hands and quicker judgment. No one laughed anymore at how little she spoke. Silence, they understood now, could be strength. The rancher approached her by the kitchen doorway, where she stood washing blood and soot from her hands. He didn't rush his words. He never did. "You don't owe me anything," he said finally. She shook her head once. "I know," she replied. He nodded, then said the thing that mattered. "But if you want a place here, it's yours. Same as any of us. No charity. No conditions. Just respect." When the sun finally broke free of the horizon, The kitchen came alive again. A pot simmered. Bread warmed. The smell of food, real food, filled the air, cutting through the memory of gunpowder. They ate together, seated wherever there was space, shoulders touching. No speeches, no promises, just the quiet understanding that something had changed. The ranch had survived the night, and she had earned her place in its future. The frontier didn't reward the loudest voices. It rewarded those who endured. Silence, out there, was often mistaken for weakness. But sometimes silence was a shield. Sometimes it was strength sharpened by survival. So let me ask you, who have you overlooked because they didn't shout? Who stood quietly, waiting to be seen? If this story stirred something in you, leave your thoughts below. Walk these frontier roads with us, where justice is earned, family is chosen, and the quiet often carry the deepest strength. The fire burns low in the ranch kitchen now. Bread rises. Laughter hums softly. And a woman who once asked for nothing more than work has finally found a home.